We're back on the John Fredericks Show. The time now is 8:10. 8:10, John Fredericks Show. John is up in Washington playing with the press class. He's in the briefing rooms. He's going to be out there again today in the Daily Brief. And this is Colonel Mike covering for John Fredericks again on the radio show. Yesterday we had Dr. Michael Schur with us. Today I'm solo and I got Michael Coleman at the keyboards. Thank you, Michael Coleman, for making me sound good. On the phone live, I think we have Larry Cerenzie of Cerenzie Energy Consulting, Salt Lake City. Larry, good morning. Welcome to the John Fredericks Show. I'm sorry.
Good morning, Colonel Mike.
Hey, man, listen.
It is great to be with you.
I'm finally got you to get on the air. Larry, we have a short time and you have a lot to cover. I know you've been writing this over the years and you've been tweaking it. It's looking better and better. And you wrote a great paper, and I know that the Trump people got this in front of Trump during the campaign. It's called Producing Our Way Back to Prosperity, the 20 and 20 for U.S. Energy Independence Plan, short for 20 million barrels of oil, fuel, in 20 years of new production, and the anatomy of the U.S. economic decline since 1970. Larry, let's go to question one. What made us great as a nation that allowed us to rise from nothing in 1776 to the world's leading power by the early 1900s?
Well, Colonel Mike, the first thing is our values. Who were we as a people? And it is that we were a Judeo-Christian nation, embedded all the values, embedded in our Constitution. We were self-ruled. We were watching over ourselves, taking care of ourselves, taking care of each other. We were united as one. That is really, I think, the very most important thing of all, being a Christian nation, truly believing in God and Jesus Christ.
So it was no matter what color or background, right?
Pardon?
It was no matter about the color or background. We were united as a nation.
Yes, and that was important. We were really the only place on earth that all colors were working together. Mm-hmm. No matter where a person came from, they came here, they became an American. Very unique situation. Okay. The next piece really is the structural blessings of the property, of our property, of our land. There was a paper written by George Friedman about the destiny of America to be the world's leading power, and he really opened my eyes to just the structural parts of the United States that no other place has. We're number one. I'll just go through and give you a smattering of these.
Go ahead.
We're number one in cropland in terms of the number of acres that we can grow crops. We're number one in crop growing days. We can harvest starting in May all the way in till September, harvesting wheat and such. We have this long growing period. We have the only 24/7, 365 water supply on Earth. It's everywhere. Even in the desert, we got water. Mm-hmm. We have energy throughout the land. Even the desert, you got tumbleweeds, so people could live, and coal seams and such. We have we've been isolated. Our land is isolated in such a way it's tough for us to be attacked. We've got the oceans. We've got on the north we have Canada. But the interesting part about a lot of that is that land is glacier scraped, so you can actually see people coming. On the south we have the desert coming up from Mexico. So we have this unique geographical positioning. We have a super long coastline, which really turns into an incredible blessing for being able to ship. We're separated by thousands of miles from the continents to the west and the east, yet we have this coastline, which allows us some great benefits for shipping. When we get into the natural resources, it gets mind-boggling.
So we have
we're number one in that.
We're number one.
We're number one in basically everything of value or importance. Number one in natural gas. We're number one in coal. We're number one in oil shale. We have the two largest formations on Earth. One of them has over 16 trillion barrels in place, the Green River Formation in the Rocky Mountains. And the second one, the Phosphoria, is right adjacent to it. It starts in Montana, goes all the way to Utah. It expands into Nevada, over into Wyoming on the other side. These things are huge, almost beyond imagination. So in the energy sector, just stepping back, we're literally looking at hundreds, if not thousands of years of energy in the hydrocarbon realm for right here in this country. To me, most people have no earthly idea where we sit with this. The next thing goes on to minerals. We're number one in gold, which generally means gold is like a cut like quail. You don't ever have one. You always have a bunch that comes with the gold. It's sort of like Kennecott and their copper mine in Salt Lake. They call it a copper mine, but there's 13 minerals that they own up to that are commercial that come out of there, and gold is the most important. So we're number one in gold, which means we're number one in copper and most everything else. Rare earth elements. We're number one in uranium. You don't see this on paper. There's 35 deposits in Utah alone that are at least 5 miles in size.
Is that in uranium, Larry?
Think of it.
Is that uranium?
Yeah, uranium. Yes, in uranium.
And just for a second, if I could pause you 1 second, this is the reason why Putin approached Frank Giustra, who was the bag man and the donor to the Clinton Foundation, and that's how Putin got Wyoming and New Mexico and Utah to get these uranium deposits. And it was Hillary Clinton's husband. I mean, Hillary Clinton lifted the ban, whatever, but the foundation got the money, and they keep talking about Trump and Putin. But continue. Go ahead.
Well, and just the last piece on that uranium, there is a deposit in the area of Moab that's 10 miles wide and 50 miles long, between the 3.5%, as I remember the numbers, of uranium. And you think about that, you almost need to do that kind of calculator, and I'm probably going to use that term a couple times, to think about what that value is when you're looking at something that goes between 60 and 120 bucks a pound, not a barrel. Okay. Then when it comes to timber, we're listed as number 8 in acreage. The kicker is our density of trees is unbelievable. When you look from, say, Northern California all the way into Canada up and through Alaska, the trees are one on top of the other, and they're huge, old-growth forests that are still available. And to the Japanese, that was our number one advantage in the war. That's what they tried to do. They tried to bomb. Well, they did. They bombed our timber. Mm-hmm. That was the only thing they came over here to do, thinking that was our greatest advantage. So that's how important that is. We're number one in navigable water. You go, well, what does that mean? Well, just picture the Mississippi River Basin itself, which feeds off the Rockies on one side and all the mountain ranges, Appalachians and such on the east. It all funnels into the Mississippi River. We have more navigable water in the Mississippi River Basin than the rest of the world combined. Mm-hmm. Then you have the Intercoastal Waterway, which goes from Texas all the way up and around the Gulf of Mexico, around Florida, all the way up into the Middle Atlantic, which basically gives us a protective waterway, almost like a river, right around our country, so that we can ship goods and services almost without all the perils of being in the ocean. Anyway, you just look at these, you step back and go, how could one place have all these things unless God really had chosen it as a blessed and promised land? So it really gives us this incredible toolbox to work from as we talk about what we'll get into in a minute, but as we talk about how do we restructure, how do we reclaim our heritage, how do we get back on track in production, everything you can think of that's needed is right here. So we don't have to create anything, it's here already.
So you're saying,
Does that make sense, Mark?
what you're saying, and I understand what you're saying, is this is a blessed nation. It was always a blessed nation. Nothing can be like this. I mean, it's all laid out for us where there's no other country that can match this. And people just don't understand the blessing that was on this nation. Now, of course, we're going to hear there was slavery. Okay, I understand that. I got it. But if you read the Bible, the Jews were in slavery 400 years. And they were in slavery for 400 years for a reason, okay? And, who sold the slaves from Africa? There's many, many groups, from the Arabs to the Africans themselves. But however, we lifted that. Abraham Lincoln made that move, and then he lost his life. And we're way beyond that point now. You know what I'm saying? So continue, Larry. I like the conversation.
Well, thank you, because you're absolutely right, and it gives me pause. that sigh was, what a blessing we have, and what a heritage we have. And I believe it is time to reclaim it.
Okay.
And that part of Make America Great Again, and think about what that concept is. And the again part is important for us to pick up where we left off. Now, are you ready to go into the economic issues?
Yeah. What was the cause? What was the cause of the economic decline?
Okay. Let me back up and see if I can paint a little picture. I have an oil production chart, which is symbolic of almost every resource and in our manufacturing that goes up constantly from 1910 all the way to 1970. It just keeps going up, up. At that time, we were the number one producer of oil on the earth. We were self-sufficient. We were, and so not just oil, but in all things. But picture this chart going up. In 1970, all of a sudden it peaks sharply and drops. You go, what in the heck happened?
Ooh,
well, as I studied that, I found out that 1970, and that's the year I graduated from high school, the 1970 was the implementation of the EPA. It was formed, Environmental Protection Agency, OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Act. It was formed in 1970. First funding of food stamps was in 1970. We shut down NASA for all intents and purposes. My dad ran the most modern lab in the world for NASA. He lost his job in 1970. You just step back and you go, oh, wow. Then the next thing they did was the first funding of NPR, National Public Radio. Control of the media was implemented in 1970.
Wow.
So all these charts fall. Wages per person were now half of what we once were. The wages are essentially half of what they were in 1970, which was predicted, by the economists. I remember in high school them saying if we have all the women go into the workplace and we allow illegal immigration, we're going to double the workforce and we're going to cut wages in half. And literally, by chart, that is exactly what has happened. So this is very important, and that was the implementation, by the way, of Johnson's Great Society. Nixon did it. Nixon started getting cold feet. He started writing papers, he's already seeing the destruction of what was happening, and next thing you know, he's taken out. So it's just very interesting of what happened. Then comes 1971, we go off the gold standard. Interestingly, it didn't go off right then. It actually went off in 1975, which set up the situation that occurred during that 4-year period of 76 to 1980. And our peanut grower, was president, right? But that is what allowed the manipulation of the money supply and interest rates to go to 22% interest rate. And in that 4-year period of Jimmy Carter, there was wealth transfer. 20% of all wealth transferred to the top 1% by us not producing our oil and by those high interest rates. 20% of all wealth was transferred. And so there were so many things set in motion by 1970 so that all these charts fall once you remove inflation, and that was the key. And Porter Stansberry, in his paper, Corruption in America, he was the number one newsletter writer on this planet, I believe, wrote this beautiful paper compiling the effects of these things and showing the GDP drops. Literally, GDP per person, per his charts, we're down 80% in real terms.
Hang on one second, Larry. The time now is 8:23. Sure. You're on the John Fredericks Show with Colonel Mike. I have Larry Cerenzie on the line, calling in from Utah on 20 and 20 prosperity, working our way back to prosperity. He's discussing the economic decline of America and how we're going to get back to being a great nation. And also, Larry, I just want to bring up, when you brought up Johnson's Great Society, we spent, since Johnson's Great Society was implemented, $22 trillion, trillion with a T. And I don't know if that was a good investment. Continue, Larry. I'm sorry.
Well, that was the implementation of a plan to take people from being independent to being dependent. It was the implementation of the plan starting in the 60s of starting to take God out of the classroom, out of the public square. It was all to take away that. Remember what we said structurally. Why were we unique? Values, number one. Mm-hmm. And Cecil Rhodes, the Rhodes Scholar, wrote a paper or a series of papers in the late 1800s where he said that the rest of the world could not stand against the United States. And so his goal was to take over the world. He formed the De Beers Diamond Trust, killed all those kings in Africa, stole all the gold mines. It was just amazing to watch him move. But his goal was to take over the world. And he said at that time he had to take over the United States because as long as the United States was, the people were free, they would not be able to accomplish that one world government. Mm. So there's all these pieces that all come to play that are now implemented, set and put in place for our decline so that we can transfer wealth to, let's say, to the powers that believe that they have the right to rule the world.
So, Larry, how do we do this?
Now, this is where it's very interesting. We literally go back to what we were doing before. It is that simple.
Before when?
Before 1970.
Okay, go ahead.
So we have to roll back. We'll go this in just a little bit of a list. What did we say? We implemented the EPA. What do we got to do? We got to undo the EPA.
Okay.
By 1974, I wrote a paper when I was working on my chemical engineering degree. By 1974, already all of the air quality in the major cities was being reversed by the simple changes that had been made starting in the 60s in the way cars operated and such, and the factories and the pollution. By then, already huge changes had made. All these things they've done since have really been more and more about controlling, shutting down industry, kind of like, let's say, the Obama administration on the coal, the constant attack.
Larry, we're coming down to 3 minutes. We're coming down to 3 minutes. We're coming down to 3 minutes. Can you give us go a little bit more forward?
Right, roll back to EPA first.
Go ahead.
Roll back OSHA. Stop the stuff about people being fined $50,000 for putting a toilet paper roll in the wrong place.
Okay.
Stop the funding for NPR. Stop funding for the United Nations. Teach our kids to think again, not what to think. Get rid of Common Core. Get rid of the Department of Education. Have the states control their education again. Put true teaching back in the classroom. Put God back in the schools and public life. Not send kids home for saying a prayer, mentioning God in the classroom. Stop illegal immigration. So there are jobs for our people. And reasons for people to become engineers and skilled labor again, so they can make a good wage.
Okay.
Unlock the federal lands. Unlock the federal lands is critical. Turn that back to the people. Like in Utah, almost 70% of the land is tied up by the feds. The wealth of nations is right here in this state. Bring it back so we can produce it again.
So we could produce what? Leedy resources again?
Yes, we go back to producing not only resources we did before, we now have the technology to take coal and turn it to gasoline. We have one deposit here that the Escalante staircase that was locked up during the Clinton years, that as it sits, it's a third drilled, is over two Saudi Arabias in size. We can now turn that to fuels instantly. We can turn natural gas to fuels. So we can take all these things, put them into production. Now, you couldn't produce some of these deposits in less than 200 or 300 years. They're so massive.
Gotcha.
But we get started now, and that allows us to do the 20 and 20. 20 million barrels of new production in 20 years. And the key to that 20 million barrels, each million barrels is 2% of GDP. That is the way we grow our economy by 40% right off the bat. We put in place the need for pipe, the need for valves, the need for pumps, the need for all the industrial pieces again, and we produce it here and generate the wealth and bring us back to our full national security, so we're not relying upon Chinese and others to produce critical elements for our weaponry, for our homes, for our grid.
Wow, this is great. This is great information. Larry, I want to thank you for coming on the show, and I want you to send me this whole thing if you have it in some PowerPoint or whatever. That was Larry Cerenzie. Larry, thank you so much. Larry Cerenzie Consulting Energy, and that's 20 Prosperity 20 and 20. You're on the John Fredericks Show.